we're ready to pan up. So I have my batter here. I've kept my rubber spatula for cleaning the bowl out at the end, and I just used my liquid measuring cup as a tool to keep it from getting the counter dirty. I have a 12-cup muffin pan, and I have a second one ready to go if I need to. This recipe I think is going to make about 15, so I'm probably going to need a second pan, and I've lined it with muffin liners. Muffin liners are always a good idea. I never want to try and be digging a cupcake out of a baking pan that was just sprayed with baking spray or greased and floured. It's always going to have usually at least a couple stick, but inexpensive muffin liners save the day and make it really easy to take them out and start eating them right away. So I'm also going to use a measuring scoop or an ice cream scoop to, it's not a measuring scoop, a portion scoop or an ice cream scoop to deposit. It's the easiest way, but you can use 2 spoons and scrape one off the other. Any kind of cupcake or muffin, you're always going to fill 2/3 to 3/4 full. So I'm going to start with one of these scoops and see how it goes. One of the things a well-written recipe will do is give you an idea of what your outcome should be. So I know I should get about 15 of these. So if I don't have 15, I probably have overfilled my muffin containers, or if I have more than 15, I've underfilled them. So we're just going in. The liners themselves don't need to be sprayed. Let's see here. Looks like maybe I overfilled a little bit. Let's see. Scraping everything down into the front of the bowl. I'm actually resting it on the counter for some balance, and then I can get more muffin out of that. I think I'm actually going to get a dozen. The 15 must have been for this recipe when it had a mix-in it. This is also a recipe you can add something like chopped dates to. So this looks right there about 2/3 to 3/4 full. So I'm going to say we're going with a dozen on this. So you don't need to really tap them. If you tap them, they usually get like wonky in there. But one thing you do before you put it in the oven is, if I had any drips, I want to take a damp paper towel and clean those up so they don't burn to the surface and sort of ruin your pan by creating like a baked on gross burnt cupcake stuff. So these are ready to go in. I preheated my oven at the beginning of my prep before I started pulling out ingredients. That was the first thing I did. And for this size muffin, 350 is good. For mini muffins in the tiny pan, that's going to be 375. We bake them at a higher temperature because they bake faster, and we don't want them to dry out over a long time in the oven. So these are going to go in, and in my oven I've set the racks to be in the middle of the oven. So if I have 2 pans of muffins, I'm going to be at the 1/3, 2/3 line. If I'm just baking one thing, I put it in the center. But even the 1/3, 2/3 is fine for baking one thing also. What I don't want it to be is in the very bottom or the very top of the oven, because it's not going to get the heat as evenly as it could. So they're going to go in. I'm going to set the timer for, my recipe says it'll take 15 to 17 minutes. So I'm going to set the timer just a little bit less than the minimum time, because I want to take an eyeball test and see if they're moving as expected. Especially if it's the first time you've made something in your oven, like any particular recipe, you want to see how your oven does. So I'm going to check them at 14 minutes, and then maybe we'll set it for more time. So I've set my oven timer for 14 minutes, and we'll take a peek when they're ready. In the meantime, it's a good time to clean up your station, get reset for the next thing, and get your toothpick out for checking doneness. So you can use a toothpick or a small wooden skewer, and this is how we're going to tell if the cake is baked in the center. So the toothpick test is something we use for a lot of different quick breads. Most muffins and cakes are toothpick tested. Scones, you go by color because they're so dry and dense. They're not really wet in the beginning either. But muffins and cupcakes and birthday cakes, we check with a toothpick. And specifically wood, because the texture of the wood wants to kind of grab crumbs. And when we go into the muffin, we're going to go into the center of the muffin, the very middle, because the middle is what bakes last. And then I'm going to do something that's kind of a pro tip. I'm not going to pull it straight out. I'm going to go in, tilt it to the side a little bit, and then pull out, because what that does is make a little bit larger of an opening so that I'm making sure the crust on top of the muffin or cake isn't scraping any batter off, so that I'm getting a true test. So I'm going to go in, tilt a few degrees to the side and pull it out, and then I'm going to look at what's on the toothpick. And there's 3 different possibilities. If there's wet batter on the toothpick, that item is not finished baking. Immediately close the oven door and let it keep going. And I really recommend testing your item at the oven. Don't even take it out, because if it's underdone and you take it out for too long, it'll collapse because of the loss of heat in the internal pressure of the item. So I just pull the pan out and check it at the oven. So I'll try and show you that when it's time. So if there's batter on there, they're not done, you're going to put them back. If there is a couple tiny crumbs, like really tiny crumbs attached, you have perfectly baked your quick bread. That means that there's the maximum amount of moisture left inside the product that hasn't been cooked out of it, but the structure has actually gelatinized and cooked. So on the molecular level, the proteins have set in place, the eggs are cooked, it's food safe, all of those good things, and when it cools, it will not sink. It'll stay the way it was. So a couple crumbs indicates perfect level of baking. No crumbs means it's fully cooked, but you cooked it a little longer than necessary, so that the product is going to be a little bit drier than it had to be. So it'll get stale a little bit faster and not be as moist when you eat it. So we look for kind of an ideal middle ground where there's a couple crumbs on there. If there aren't any the first, excuse me, the first couple times you make something, that's okay. It's still going to be delicious, but we're kind of searching for that perfection of having a couple tiny crumbs stuck to it, almost like grains of sand that you'll see. I don't know if I'll be able to show you, but we'll try. All right, so that's the toothpick test for checking the doneness of quick breads that are muffins or cakes. All right, here we go.